Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Well, now, the appointment of Boris Johnson as Foreign Secretary has been compared by one Labour MP to the Roman Emperor Caligula making his horse a senator. Well, that's just one of the barbs being thrown at Mr Johnson, who has a long track record of making questionable public comments about foreign dignitaries. His task as Britain's representative on the world stage now made all the more difficult. Here's our Foreign Affairs correspondent, Jonathan Rugman.
Take care, everybody.
Mr Johnson, how do you feel about your appointment, sir?
Very excited, very happy, thank you.
Boris Johnson was flying high this afternoon, his first day in his new job. Not flying as high as in this notorious stunt in 2012, and certainly not adored. For many in the chancelleries of Europe and beyond are astonished that a man who compared the EU's ambition with Nazi Germany is now the UK's top diplomat. France's foreign minister responded this morning with undiplomatic language of his own.
I'm not worried about Boris Johnson, but you know very well what his style is like, his method. He lied a lot to the British people during the campaign, and now he is the one to have his back against the wall, to defend his country and to clarify his relationship with Europe.
In Washington, the State Department's spokesman heard the news and broke into what seemed a disbelieving grin.
How do you think?
In Berlin, this talk show couldn't suppress its giggles. While only yesterday the German foreign minister talked of irresponsible British politicians bolting off from Brexit to play cricket. I find it monstrous, he said, making it very clear that Johnson was the monster he had in mind. But Boris is no stranger to scrapes. In fact, he seems to thrive on them. And now he has risen from the political dead, the second coming after a fortnight of miracles.
After a vote like the referendum result on June the 23rd, it is inevitable that there's going to be a certain amount of plaster coming off the ceiling in the chancelleries of Europe. It wasn't the result that they were expecting, and clearly they're making their views known in a frank and free way. I have to say that the gentleman that you mentioned, the French foreign minister, in fact has sent me a charming letter just a couple of hours ago, saying how much he looked forward to working together and to deepening Anglo-French cooperation on all sorts of areas, and that is what we want to achieve.
British ambassadors may have choked over his newspaper articles, like this one on Barack Obama.
The part Kenyan president's ancestral dislike of the British Empire.
I love Winston Churchill.
Or this on President Putin.
Despite looking a bit like Dobby the house elf.
Dobby, shush, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to offend you or anything.
He is a ruthless and manipulative tyrant.
Or this description of Hillary Clinton.
She's got dyed blonde hair and pouty lips and a steely blue stare, like a sadistic nurse in a mental hospital.
And this year's limerick on President Erdogan of Turkey.
There was a young fellow from Ankara who was a terrific w***er.
The Turkish president has a very thin skin and has been known to take a long time to heal relations with countries that have upset him. I think Boris is going to have to eat a lot of humble pie quite early on if he wants to get on the right foot in Ankara.
And I would say to people who are anxious about this appointment, don't rush to judgment. It's a bold appointment, it's an imaginative appointment, and it's what we need at a crucial moment in the history of our foreign policy and diplomacy, a shot of adrenaline into the system.
Russia's foreign ministry sounded relieved. I can say we won't miss Mr. Hammond, their spokeswoman said. Perhaps they are hoping a softening of the policy on President Assad's Syria is on the cards. We understand several pro-Brexit MPs have visited Damascus in the last few months, and we're told unofficially that Johnson's appointment is welcome there. This is a department which has lost 25% of its budget in the last few years and is badly in need of cheering up. What's more, Boris Johnson's charisma could give British foreign policy a badly needed boost on the world stage. That is, if he puts his undiplomatic language behind him, as he surely must. Jonathan Rugman, Channel 4 News, at the Foreign Office.
Well, we're joined in the studio now by the former US State Department diplomat Colleen Graffi, and from Helsinki by the former Finnish Prime Minister Alexander Stubb. Alexander Stubb, what does it look like from Helsinki, Boris Johnson?
Well, it certainly looks like an interesting nomination, but I would still say that the jury is not even in yet, so the jury is not out. I mean, we should have a look what he comes up with. I'm sure that when you get a post like being the Foreign Secretary of the UK, you're probably going to change the way in which you behave, the types of things that you say. So it's too early to say. I think Boris knows his foreign policy and he speaks languages, so give him credit for that.
A diplomatic answer, I could argue, Alexander Stubb. I mean, you don't think that Hillary Clinton will mind at all about having pouted lips and looking like a mental hospital nurse?
Well, I'm sure if Boris Johnson were to say that as Foreign Secretary, I'm sure she would mind. A lot of us come with luggage, and especially columnists come with a long list of luggage as well. And I think it's important to just wait it out. It's too early to say what's going to happen. Boris Johnson will probably be one of the best known foreign secretaries around the world, and let's see what happens. I think it was an interesting nomination by the new Prime Minister,
right,
especially from a European perspective.
Well, Colleen Graffi, you and I disagree about what we saw when the poor Foreign Office spokesman was being quizzed about Boris Johnson. To me, it looked as if he was completely taken by surprise and thought, you can't be serious.
No, I think that post-Brexit, Britain needs a big, bold narrative, and Boris Johnson is going to be the person to deliver that. And people forget that diplomacy isn't about just the deals that are done behind closed doors. It's also about public diplomacy, which is how do you articulate this to the people? And in democratic nations, you have to do that in order for your foreign policy to be carried out. And for Boris Johnson, he's popular with people. He's known in the United States. No criticism of Philip Hammond, but how many people know that he was British Foreign Secretary? But Boris Johnson, 2 terms as Mayor of London. The Olympics were brilliant. They brought the country together. They were very exciting. And so he has the sort of big personality that I think is needed at this time.
Well, Alexander Stubb, which is more important, the loud hailer or a bit of a sort of diplomatic softly, softly?
You probably get a combination of the two with Boris Johnson. I mean, a lot of times people come into office with high expectations and then you get a low outcome. Boris Johnson could well be one of those guys who's put down in the beginning, low expectations, and then high outcome. I mean, I'm sure as a sort of globalist, internationalist, he'll be able to sort of wave around, and he's of interest when he travels the world. He'll probably be the #1 politician in the UK.
Colleen, we got you back. We got you back. There was a bit of a break there, but we've got you back, Alexander. No? Gone again. Well, we'll come back in a moment when we sorted out our technology. But that is interesting. He's actually talked his way into a low expectation at the beginning. If he does well, he'll be fine. But you mentioned being London mayor. The complaint about him was that he was a part-time mayor. He never did more than 3 days a week, and he was always writing his column.
Well, there's the other side of Boris, which is that he does have a brilliant mind, and he has a lot of self-confidence, which means that he has the confidence to appoint people that are smart and intelligent, and the Foreign Office job is a big one. I know it's been divided up, but I think it bodes well for someone who has the confidence to appoint good people around them. And to have him as the person, as the outward face of Britain, is a very important, time-consuming job, and that would be perfect for him.
Well, let's look at that job. I mean, how do you perceive Britain's position in the world now? Do you think it's been diminished by all this?
Well, it all depends on the leadership. So a safe pair of hands with Theresa May is important, but I don't know that she has quite the personality to be able to drive this post-Brexit narrative that is so important the way it needs to be articulated.
Were we mistaken in thinking that, that actually America looked to Britain as the gateway into Europe?
Well, there's no question but that the U.S. government would have preferred Britain to be within the EU, as Obama has said. But I think that there's going to be a turning point where people say, what a gutsy nation to be 1 out of 28 to say, we can do this on our own. We're tired of the rules and regulations. We want to control our immigration. And it all depends on what happens next. Get some trade deals done. Have a welcoming face to the world, and it could be pulled off, and that will be a bit of a threat to the rest of Europe. But
let me try that on Alexander Stubb. Gutsy, or do you think Britain is diminished by all this?
Oh, definitely diminished. I mean, politically, from a security political perspective and from an economic perspective, I mean, the UK, after all, has been a great empire. Then it adjusted itself to be Great Britain inside the European Union. And now I think the threat is that it'll become a bit of a little England. It will have much less clout in international negotiations. It'll still have its seat in the UN Security Council. That's fine. But certainly the United Kingdom would have been much better off inside the EU. And obviously the EU would have been much better off with the UK inside as well.
Well, the UK breaking up is clearly a very real possibility. That is going to leave a sort of rump England, which is not a particularly attractive idea, is it?
Yeah. If that happens, there's the threat that it could be little England, but that's not necessarily on the cards. So Britain's fate is before it, and it all depends on the leadership and also the will of the people. I mean, this has happened. It's been explained that there's no second referendum. So now it's all about the will of the people to actually say, we're going to make this work, and it could be impressive.
Alexander, what would your tip to Mrs. May be? I mean, would you have a quick sum up of a sentence that you'd advise her? Can she fudge this whole business of leaving?
Yeah, well, two observations on that. Number one is that we all understand that Brexit means Brexit. That's all fine and good. But I don't think anyone really knows or understands what a Brexit means. The only piece of advice I would give, point number two, is to just take your time. You know, the UK has been inside the European Union for over 40, 50 years. And now you can't dismantle this just overnight. So it's going to be very politically complicated, legally complicated. So take your time and let's see what we can do. I personally think we should use this situation and make a new deal for Europe.
Right.
And in that sense, renew Europe and then have Britain inside the EU in the future, but in a completely different EU.
Alexander Stubb in Finland, thank you very much indeed. Colin Graffy too, thank you very much.
Now, some late developments tonight about the new Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson at the French embassy. He received a rather frosty reception from some guests after assuring them that Britain was not leaving Europe.
To coin a phrase, toujours plus étroite. Thank you very much, everybody, for listening. Have a great...
Mr. Johnson was quoted as saying the rights of French citizens living in the UK would be protected as long as British citizens in France were protected too.